Thank you all for coming back. This is what I usually have to tell my students after the break because usually, actually, the room is about 3 or 4 people. So I give those people better grades. Hi, my name is Brian Liang. I am the Vice President of the Partnership for Safe Medicines. I'm also a physician at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine, as well as an attorney, or I shouldn't say that. I went to law school, and I'm a professor at California Western School of Law as well. I'm a professor of public health at San Diego State University. Today, we've talked and heard wonderful information about the issues associated with consumers and patients in this early panel this morning. But right now, what we're going to do is shift gears and really start to understand the scope of the problem. We see the point, the sharp end, which is the patients, and that's what we care about. But we have to determine exactly who is doing this and who's benefiting from these drugs. Now, as a physician, I do want to give the message out. Sal said this earlier in the panel, no one's telling these people, hey, there's a problem. So I wanted to tell my physician colleagues in the audience, are any physicians here? Ain't it the truth? Always the same, no physicians. But let me, let me talk to myself while you can wait. Basically, physicians, it is a problem. And indeed, when therapeutic failure occurs in your patients, do not simply assume it's because they are sick or because there is, in fact, therapeutic variation. It can be the source of the drug. It can be the drug itself. It can be the parts of the drug. You need to look into that and figure it out, because this is a tremendously challenging puzzle, and the sharp end on the other side, not the patient, but the physician, has to be the patient advocate. And in this situation, they have to help investigate, not just for the patient in front of them, but for all future patients. And therefore, this is a tremendously important medical issue, medical meaning physician. All right, you can all wake up. And now, what I'd prefer to hear when we're talking about this issue is something that was pointed out earlier by Walt. We need to hear more of, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the people who are doing this to our public need to be prosecuted. And in fact, we are here to prosecute them. That's what we need to hear a lot more of. But if we are going to do that, we need to know where the problem exists and where does it extend. And that's what the experts of this panel are going to tell us and educate us about. We have 4 awesome people. First, Nancy Kennedy. Nancy is Special Agent, Special Operations Manager, Drug Investigations at the FDA Office of Criminal Investigations. She handles drug investigations, including those with counterfeit drugs. Rob Hill, Chief Pharmaceutical Investigation Section, Office of Diversion Control at DEA. He provides programmatic oversight of enforcement strategies and operations aimed at stopping the diversion of pharmaceutical controlled substances. Charlie Sion. Charlie is the Executive Director of the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators. It's a lot. It should be NADI. NADI. Everyone knows NADI. And the Program Director, National Precursor Log Exchange. And Jeffrey Gren. Jeffrey Gren is Director, Office of Health and Consumer Goods, U.S. Department of Commerce. Importantly, he is, although a New Yorker, he was smart enough to go to Boston for school, and I hope he learned up there that it is, in fact, the best baseball team is, in fact, the Boston Red Sox and not the New York Yankees. Yes, thank you. And so thank you very much for your, okay, so let's turn this over to Nancy Kennedy. Please help me welcome Nancy Kennedy.
Good morning, everybody. When I was listening to the first panel, everybody that got up and spoke did such a fantastic job, and everything they said was so right on, and I kept thinking, oh, I want to add that in, or I want to talk about this, or add more into my speech and comment on it, but there's just so much to talk about. When I volunteered to participate as a speaker at this interchange, and I saw what the panel I was chosen to be on, it's called Who's Benefiting from Unsafe Drugs, my immediate thought was, well, no one, just the criminals. And I thought, well, this is easy. That's, end of story. But realistically, knowing that I couldn't just get up here and say no one and answer that question, I decided I would talk in general about unsafe drugs and continuing threats to the U.S. pharmaceutical supply chain. As I talk, I'm going to run a loop of photos of unsafe drugs. These pictures are from actual investigations. Some are of just the drugs. Others are of the places we found the drugs or where the drugs have been manufactured. And I know I know stories behind most of these. Some of these I don't know the full story behind. So later on, if you have questions about any of these photos or anything, I'll be happy to try and answer them. I was thinking as I was preparing for this speech about a question one of the interchange organizers asked me to respond to. The question was, why are you passionate about the fight against counterfeit or unsafe drugs? So my reason is this. In my position at HOCI headquarters, I am like the senior operations manager for the drug investigations. So up at my level, up at 10,000 feet, I get to see all the cases up at that level, and I can see the trends forming and the connections between the cases. I can see the international cases connections growing and the types and amounts of counterfeit and unapproved drug and unsafe drugs coming into the country changing and growing. So I don't like what I see, and that's why I'm passionate about this. One of the things I've seen a change in over the years is in the imported, unapproved, and counterfeit drugs coming into the country. Initially, these types of drugs were coming in to just individuals in small import quantities. Then the quantities started getting larger and larger, and then they were going to drop shippers and distributors who were working for online pharmacy operations. Now we see quantities of these drugs coming in and going directly to doctors, clinics, brick and mortar pharmacies, and these are for use and distribution directly to patients. Here's one example. A shipment of what I would refer to as misbranded or unapproved drugs. These were injectable cancer drugs. They were stopped in the UK. These drugs were destined for a US medical supply wholesaler. The wholesaler sells pharmaceuticals directly to doctors' offices and clinics. We found out this shipment of drugs actually originated in Pakistan, and inside the package was information indicating that payment for these drugs went to a Canadian pharmacy. So that's an example of you really don't know where these are coming from. Probably what would have happened in the UK is they would have gone to this other UK remailer or other importer or other organization, would have been probably repackaged to disguise that they didn't come from Pakistan, but they really came from the UK, and which seems to be more acceptable to people. In another instance, a U.S. pharmacist in Texas was convicted after he was found to be importing large quantities of Viagra and Cialis from China. These were, of course, counterfeit, and the pharmacist had ordered the drugs over the internet. And that was an investigation we worked with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And then recently, in 2009, we prosecuted a doctor in California for introducing foreign misbranded drugs into interstate commerce. The doctor was smuggling these injectable cancer drugs in from India and Honduras. And according to some of his employees, he was at times watering down these medications. So the patients were not receiving the full dose, and then he could make those vials of medication last longer and go to more people. So, make no mistake about it, this is all about money, people wanting to make money. Those examples illustrate one way in which the U.S. pharmaceutical supply chain is being vulnerable. The U.S. supply chain is in place to prevent counterfeit and unsafe pharmaceuticals from getting to consumers. So even if these drugs aren't counterfeit or otherwise unsafe, allowing this activity continue, allowing this bypassing of the supply chain, provides a ready path by which counterfeiters and even terrorists can introduce poisoned, fake, or adulterated drugs into the marketplace. Another long-time threat to the supply chain is drug diversion. A lot of you know about this. I've heard you reference Catherine Eban's book. And it still is very prolific, still going on a lot today. Illicit drug diverters operate outside a legitimate distribution system, and they deal in discounted drugs from questionable sources. These drugs obtained from these sources are often stolen, expired, or counterfeit. The drugs are often repackaged by the drug diverters into counterfeit labeled packages and bottles and sold to wholesalers who will turn a blind eye to the true source of the drugs. It is not at all uncommon for these repackaged drug bottles to contain the incorrect strength of the drug, the incorrect drug, or other items. We've seen candy, we've seen Tic Tacs in these bottles. In one instance, we saw black beans. For a while, they were putting aspirin in these bottles, and then these bottles go into the wholesaler, to the pharmacy, and then get dispensed to the patients. And storage and handling conditions of these diverted drugs is obviously questionable. You don't know if they've been sitting, in a trailer in the heat or what's been going on with them. And ultimately, these drugs are dispensed to unwitting and often vulnerable patients. So, in answer to the question, who is benefiting from unsafe drugs? My answer is, it's not the patients, and isn't that what really matters?
Can I ask you a question? Or you're
Anybody
done?
have?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I'm done.